This poster is about the very fundamental difference between the advertising agency approach to solving problems and the behavior science approach to solving problems. Very, very simple. Now, this comes in, say, 3 levels. The highest level is how are we going to deal with climate problems in general? So this basically comes in 2 basic levels. Number 1, how are we going to solve problems that have to do with climate? Specifically, this poster is about an effort in Vermont to go about addressing climate issues through a very practical, mundane, day-to-day activity known as weatherization or home energy efficiency retrofitting. So there's this as I said a moment ago, there's this advertising agency approach to getting people to retrofit their homes that's being used now. Then there's the behavior science approach that's not being used. So without saying it's a complete failure, because you can never really say that in science, we'll just look at some figures. Number 1, 28% of global CO2 emissions are related to the home. Vermont needs to energy retrofit 80,000 homes by 2020. This is mandated by the state legislature. VEIC, which is the state's energy efficiency utility, has convinced fewer than 4,000 Vermonters to do it. I'm not here to nail on VEIC. I think the problem is they've just chosen the wrong tool to get people to basically save the climate by working on a very local, easy level, which is home. Now, there's another whole problem. It's not been proven that more efficient homes are related to using less energy 100% of the time. In fact, the numbers are all over the place. People will report, yes, my utility bills are lower. That may be true 100% of the time in those cases. But there are 2 problems with that. Number 1, there was a study that was done in the late 70s, but in a housing project, in a housing development where there were identical houses, identical appliances, there was as much as a 300% differentiation in energy use. So it's not about energy retrofitting your home primarily as it is to emphasize behavior. So you can basically, is Vermont creating a state full of efficient homes peopled by inefficient residents? That's a really important question. So the effort shouldn't stop with just retrofitting a home. The effort has to be a persuasion, behavioral message that is ongoing so that people continue to be efficient. Because the other problem is, it's also been shown by various researchers that if you perform something, if you perform an energy efficient action in your life, such as buying a higher mileage car that gets better gas mileage, or energy retrofitting your home, you're actually kind of likely in a lot of cases to become less efficient in other parts of your life. So if you retrofit your home, you might buy a bigger car because you're saying, I'm doing all kinds of great things. It's kind of like the same idea. I can eat that cheesecake, I'm going to go run 5 miles tomorrow. Or, yeah, I'm going to binge on Oreos, but I'm going to have it with a Diet Coke. You know, we all kind of understand this behavior because we've all sort of experienced it in various ways. So that's another really big issue that VEIC doesn't touch. They may energy retrofit these homes, but they're not talking about an ongoing behavior issue. Now, moving over here, so that's basically the problem. Moving over here, we've got the ad agency approach, and I looked at a bunch of the well, I looked at essentially the entire campaign that VEIC was running for to convince Vermonters to energy retrofit their homes based on an incentive model, $2,500 cash back or tax incentive, I can't remember which one, but this was how they were trying to convince people how to do it. Their ad agency took these clever concepts and they said, this is going to convince people to energy retrofit their homes. Well, if you look at these things from a behavior science and persuasion perspective, they just don't carry any water. There's just no connection whatsoever. So I examined their campaign based on behavior science and persuasion science criteria and found virtually no correlations. Where I did find correlations, I found what I call the random application of proven techniques, where VEIC's ad agency was taking sampling, like Whitman's sampler from behavior theories, and sticking them all into the same campaign, which is, if you're a behavior scientist of any sort, there's no way you'd do that. And just the first biggest reason you wouldn't do that is because you can't test what message worked and what didn't. So my recommendations are several things. First, toss out the ad agency model, because the ad agency model is basically, it's a reliance on what's called the AIDA model, which stands for the process, the presumed process, that once someone becomes aware of something, they get an interest in something, and that creates a desire to do something, which then leads to their taking an action. So this is basically the model upon which the ad agency world is predicated, and it's been proven by various researchers not to be valid. So throw that out. Demographic data as predictive, throw that out. As I mentioned a moment ago, the random application and proven techniques, throw it out. Inadequate measures, say website hits, Facebook likes. These are measures that are very common in the ad industry. They can be, let's say, creatively interpreted in a variety of ways that aren't very helpful to the end goal. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, the absence of an ongoing behavior change campaign equals this insufficient change. We're not doing enough. And that's the math. That's what it ends up being. And that's what's frustrating about it, because this is how we're trying to get there. Okay, this is a chart. 3 major concepts about how to attack or understand audience segmentation. Rogers' diffusion of innovation stages, pretty familiar to pretty familiar to the layperson. Basically, the early adopters, late majority, all that language, it's kind of seeped into the mainstream. 6 Americas has not seeped into the mainstream. It's done by a bunch of folks at George Mason and I believe Princeton. They divide people based on their climate beliefs, and they draw profiles of these people. And trans-theoretical model, stages of change. The idea is that if you're going to change behavior, you're always going to be somewhere. You're either going to be pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, or maintenance. Whatever you're doing, say you're trying to quit smoking, you might be in pre-contemplation mode. Say you've already quit smoking and you don't want to go back, you might be in maintenance mode. On every behavior of life, we're on this scale somewhere. So that's segmenting your audience and starting to understand actually who they are, rather than saying, oh, we did some demographic, data, and we found out that these people who had a certain income and a certain education level and had this certain set of beliefs did home energy retrofitting, and therefore we believe that's who's going to do it in the future. Well, guess what's wrong? There are many things wrong with that as well. Guess what's wrong with that partially? If someone says to you, hey, say you're the energy efficiency utility, and they say, we want to give you a survey. You've just spent $10,000, $15,000 retrofitting your house. You got your rebate. Why did you do it? Why did you do it, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, Ms. or Dr. Smith? Why did you do this? Here, look at our scale. You did it to save money. You did it because your neighbors did it. You know, all these reasons. Oh, and gee, look, you can choose these other things. I did it for the future of my children. Or I did it because I believe in the environment. What are you going to answer? You're going to answer the things that make you look good. That's called social desirability bias. It's a common survey bias. So this demographic information isn't necessarily nearly as helpful as understanding audience segmentation. Understanding that even if you are a dismissive, a person who does not believe in climate science, there is some reason that can be found for you to home energy retrofit. And it's not that hard to find it. But to tell that person that you need to do this for the environment or your children or whatever is wasted money. Okay, so then we move on to the conclusions. This is pretty classic social science stuff. So instead of relying on this model that we're talking about here, segment the homeowners like we're talking about here, employ anthropological research methods and community-based social marketing. Try to understand people based on where they live, what they do, how they feel. One big anecdotal but probably extremely valid data point comes from the home energy retrofitting business. What's common to every home retrofitter is they don't tell people how much money they're going to save. The first thing they say is how much more comfortable you're going to be once we retrofit your home. Comfort. That's an anthropological thing, and that's measured in a lot of different ways. That's understanding how people's environments operate, how they operate in their environment. Okay, so I'm going to persuasion theories at every level. The really interesting thing is one of the most important points of behavior science is that, probably the most important point, is that as human beings, we like to think we're logical and we like to think we're linear. And therefore, when we put out appeals, such as these ad agency appeals, which are somewhat logical in a way, assuming that people hate high energy bills, assuming they're going to replace their windows and perhaps they should do a home energy retrofit instead, instead of looking at how people, assuming that people are being logical, we have to assume that people are going to be not necessarily illogical, but are going to act on a set of exigencies that are not related to logic or linear thinking. And the way I like to describe that is, picture yourself on the savannah, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years ago. You come upon a group of proto-human beings who are basically your clan's people. They're all eating a root. You've never seen this root before in your life. You don't know if this root is safe. They're all eating it. You're hungry. You say, well, if they're all eating it and they're not dead, I guess I can eat this root, okay? Now, scenario number 2, fast forward several hundred million years, skip over the Enlightenment. We're supposedly very logical now. Picture yourself at a movie theater. There are 2 ticket windows. One ticket window is empty, one ticket window has 10 people at it. Which window are you going to go to? Why aren't you going to go into the other window? Well, maybe you think you're skipping ahead of other people. Maybe you think there's a reason they're not there. Maybe you think it's dangerous. Maybe you think there was just an announcement that you missed that said don't use this line. The point is, even if you go and use that line, you're going to feel awkward about it. This is what I'm talking about when we're talking about persuasion theories. These are basic things that behavior scientists have known about for a long time, and they can be employed to get people to do things such as home energy retrofit. So, test your messages. You don't know anything until you test your messages. That's the next stage. Be aware of, as I mentioned earlier, social desirability bias as well as survey bias. For instance, everyone says they want to save money and help the planet, but do they? How much do they, if they do? And if they do, what are the barriers? Because you can want to save the planet and you might have barriers. What are those real barriers? We don't know those barriers. Collect valid results. Don't collect website hits. Don't collect Facebook likes. Don't collect supposed views of something. These things can be extremely misleading, and they're used in the ad industry all the time to trumpet the success of something that's not necessarily successful. And then finally, commit to an ongoing behavior change campaign to reduce overall consumer energy use. That's really important. You can't just declare victory and go home.